Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 111 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me, and tonight we are previewing the SEC. Now, a lot of these teams have already played a game. We are going to take those into account, but this is for more or less the preseason preview here for what has been the best conference in college basketball the last few years. Mike, what are some overarching thoughts here on the conference as a whole? They have the defending champions. They had a ton of great teams last year. You think
Yeah.
more of the same for them this year?
Yeah, until last year, it seemed like the Big 12 really had a grip on college basketball, and that dramatically shifted last year. It was a banner year for the SEC. I think you could argue that it was potentially the best conference in college basketball history last year, and the results paid forward in March. Yeah, they had a lot of teams that lost early, but they had a lot of teams that made deep runs. Obviously, Florida won the national championship, so it was a great year for the SEC. And the question is going to be, can they replicate that same success this year? They're metric darlings in the SEC right now. I think, Sean, you said 13 teams in the top 40
Yep.
in Torvik,
And
which is
if you want to extend that, it's 14 in the top 43.
yeah, it's absolutely nuts. We saw a couple of red flags, I think, from a couple of teams on opening night here. So there's going to be, I think, a little bit of changes of who's going to be at the top. Mostly stays the same, but we'll see a few shifts. And I think there's a lot of some of these bubble teams, maybe in the 10 through 13 range. They're going to be really curious teams this year that I'm interested to deep dive and get to know more of as the season progresses, because I do think there's a team that's outside this expected top five that's going to perform well above standards, and it'll be curious to see who that ends up being.
And a stark look here at Torvik, you have Florida at 6th, and then Tennessee is 2nd and 13th. So could we see a little bit of what's happening to this conference in football where there is too many good teams for a great or elite team to come out of it? It didn't happen last year in basketball, and there was a lot of cannibalization here in the
Yeah.
conference. But with enough non-conference wins, that might be a good thing. But could you see that happening? Just the league just totally beating up on each other?
Just beating up on each. I mean, we've seen it happen before in the Big 12, and that was kind of a similar thing where you had 70% of your conference, 80% of your everybody twice. You're playing a tournament team, and whatever, probably 15 of your 20 games, 16 of your 20 games potentially in the SEC. So absolutely there's going to be some cannibalization. There's probably going to be some good teams that are going to be left out of the big dance as a result. But um, I think teams that get into March will be rewarded by probably playing easier talent and teams from different leagues that haven't been up to the same physicality that they've seen in the SEC.
All right, Michael, let's start with the defending champs. Florida predicted to win the SEC again. I believe they won it last year.
They did.
They are the only team in this conference with a loss. Now that came last night, but we're going to focus on the season as a whole here. If you listen to our Big 12 cast, we think that Arizona was going to be really good. They turns out they were. I don't know if there's a ton of really red flags from this one. They still have a ton of good games in the non-conference. A Miami and an MTE. They go on the road to Duke. They play UConn on a neutral. The roster is pretty much only different in the backcourt. The front court still has the big guys. Thomas Howe, Micah Hanglotten, Chinyelu is still there. Condon is still there. And they do have new guards. But this team is really, really talented, and I think last night proved it, and they're going to
Yeah.
have plenty of chances to get a bunch of big wins even before SEC play happens.
Yeah, I think the only real concern that I saw out of Florida, and I think this is more of the opponent that they're playing. Arizona's a really physical team, and they couldn't really match that physicality that well without getting into foul trouble and guys like Condon fouling out of the game. But aside from that, this is a very talented team. And you look at some of the guys that they brought in. I think Xavier Lee is going to be a really interesting case. He's a high scorer at Princeton last year. We've seen them have success from guys come from lower level schools and succeed significantly at Florida and become some of the best players in the country, especially in the guard position. Boogie Fland's also going to be an interesting one coming from Arkansas. He's got experience in the SEC. Yes, he's not, he's new to this Florida program, but he's played all these teams that they're playing this year. So he knows what SEC ball is all about. It's going to be, and you look at the rest of this team, they're retaining a lot of talent. So I feel really good about Florida. Their bigs did struggle a little bit last night on the defensive end. Condon got into foul trouble and fouled out, but overall, I think this is a really, really solid team in my preseason SEC favorite, along with almost everybody else.
Yeah, the front court is going to be a problem. They have four like really solid forwards, and that's not really how championship teams have been built in the past, right? It's been guards win you games in March. They do have two good guards. My worry is that they're too similar. They both are really great facilitators that thrive when there's a lot of great spacing. I don't know if that's going to be the case with this, Florida team. They were 7 of 27 from three in their first game. They have Ingram, they have Klavzar who can make shots, but I think this team's ability to sort of spread the floor might limit them a little bit
Yeah.
in terms of being like the top five team. But even if they go like they're projected to go 12-6 in the SEC, that like might be enough to be the best team this year. Like if you win 2/3 of your games.
Yeah, I mean we've seen it before. I remember one year in the Big 12, 13-5 tied for conference champion. That's like the same winning percentage.
Yeah.
So it very well could. And you do look at Florida, it is a significant uh, downgrade from their backcourt last year. And like their backcourt is still outstanding this year. Don't get me wrong, but you don't have Walter Clayton Jr. running this team this year. That's a huge step back. They don't have Will Richard this year. Um, so it's going to be the front court's going to have to answer the call. And sometimes Florida got away with teams, you know, with their front court being outmanned and outgunned, like they were against U of H in the championship game last year. But they're going to have to answer the call this year.
All right, Michael, let's move to the team that's predicted to finish second here in the SEC. They're the third best team per Torvik. They have just tipped off their season a few minutes ago, and that is Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats. We talked about their exhibitions, what we liked, what we didn't like. But one thing's for certain, Mike, that Mark Pope has accumulated a ton of talent. He brings back Otega Owe, who might be the best returning player in the conference, and then he brings in, he has his freshmen, as Kentucky has had in the past, Jasper Johnson leading that, and then a couple of transfers in Jalond Lowe from Pitt, Denzel Aberdeen from Florida, and Jaden Quaitance from Arizona State, who I do not know if he's available. He's coming off a torn ACL from last year. They still have Brandon Garrison. They get Mohamed Diabate. This Kentucky team is loaded.
Yeah, Owe could be the player of the year in the SEC this year. He's that good. You're returning 16.2 points a game to a Kentucky team that, yes, scores in bunches. But this year, Sean, what we were impressed about in the preseason was their ability to play defense. We haven't seen that out of a Kentucky team in several years, to be honest
Or
with
a
you.
Mark Pope team, really.
Or yeah, exactly, or Mark Pope. Either Calipari at Kentucky or Mark Pope. It didn't matter. We haven't seen a good defensive Kentucky team in a while, and we seem to maybe get that this year. I mean, more to follow um, with these pre-conference games that are going to be going on the next couple months. But that's what I think makes this Kentucky team scary, and that's why I think they're the number two preseason team in the SEC. They're also going to have the ability to score the ball as always. We know that's going to happen with Mark Pope teams. Um, you know, Denzel Aberdeen wasn't a big scorer last year, nor was Cam Williams, but you expect them to put up some pretty significantly higher numbers this year with the Kentucky Wildcats.
And they, as per Torvik, 24th in offense, 8th in defense. So a little bit of a
Yeah.
change there. But But Mike, when you think about teams that play good defense and have two really good closers in Low and Owe, like that's a formula for a lot of wins, right?
Yeah.
If you were going to find your, I feel like we've talked about this for hundreds of different teams over the years. If you are, if you're built to play in close games, you better be good at, not turning the ball over, making free throws, and making big time shots. It seems like that this will be the formula for Kentucky this year. I don't know if they're going to be overmatched at all this year in any game, and they're probably going to win some games where they don't shoot it great, and
Yeah.
then they're obviously going to look good in some games too. But I think this Kentucky team might be better than last year's.
Absolutely. And look out too for Jalen Lowe. I think he's going to be a huge playmaker for Kentucky as well. That's going to be some more of that star firepower at the guard position. That could really put up some points for them. So, yeah, I think this is about as excellent and probably as high as expectations as they've had in Lexington in a few years.
Yeah, they're definitely thinking Final Four. And I can't blame you can blame a lot of fan bases for thinking too high. I don't think that can be attributed to Big Blue Nation here. But
Yeah.
all right, let's go down, Mike, to Tennessee at number 3 in the poll, 13th per Torvik. Rick Barnes has got a pretty talented team once again. He brings in Jacoby Gillespie from the transfer portal from Maryland. Felix
Yeah.
Okpara is back. He was an Ohio State transfer. He played at Tennessee last year. And then they get 5-star Nate Ament. Those will be the big three. A couple other roster players to fill out. But once again, Mike, Rick Barnes has got a team that can win some games.
Yeah, I mean, this team lost so much production from a year ago. I think they lost their entire starting lineup with the exception of Okpara, but it's still going to be a good team. Rick Barnes seems to have it down in Tennessee, and there's a lot of people that are disappointed right now at Rocky Top that they just can't reach the Final Four. I think that's an incredibly unfair uh, expectation considering Tennessee's never done that before to start. But also, I mean, this team ran into a buzzsaw that was University of Houston in the Elite Eight. And yes, Houston did embarrass them a little bit, but I don't know if I'm as high on Tennessee as I was a year ago, just because they've got so many new guys on the team. This is a completely different new roster, and Nate Ahmed's going to be a fun player to watch. He could be one of the best freshmen in the country. I think he's preseason, uh, the fourth ranked prospects. Could be wrong, but it's going to be a really good team. I think they're my number 4 team right now in the SEC, but still a great roster that Rick Barnes continues to push out at University of Tennessee.
And Mike, as you were talking there, I was sort of cycling through the profiles of some of their players: Jalen Carey, Cade Phillips, Amari Abrams, some of their role players. And Carey's played some good minutes last year. Abram made 63s. So there is some roles that can be filled here by some of these guys. I think there's a chance Nate Ament. I still think there's a big three for freshmen in the country between Peterson, Boozer, and DeBansa. I think there's a chance Ament might be able to make it 4. I think at this point he is sort of a tier below those three. That's still lottery pick, one and done.
Yeah.
But I think there's a chance he can insert himself into that and make it a 4-way conversation. They're supposed to be great defensively. Again, third, 41st in offense. They didn't look great offensively yesterday against Mercer. 6 of 20. They did only shoot 17 threes. And in this conference with some of the teams that are going to be flying up and down, you probably need more than that.
Yeah.
But, they're going to be good. It's just, how good are they?
Absolutely.
All right, Mike. Well, let's go down to Nate Oates in Alabama, who are 21st in Torvik, and that is 6th in the SEC, and they come in at 4th in the SEC poll. Nate Oates, after a tough exit to Duke in the Elite Eight last year, does bring back a couple players: Latrell Wrightsell, Aiden Holloway, and LeBaron Philon. And without a huge transfer haul, this might be the first team that we've said the expectations are significantly lower than last year. Last year's team was national championship good. Mark Sears. It seems like that this team is a little bit below that at this point, this time around.
Yeah, this is still going to be an offensive scoring team. I think that doesn't change from a year ago, but the talent level definitely does. You looked at that Alabama team last year, I think is probably the most talented team in program history. And they still have a lot of good talent. It's just not, Marcus Sears leading the point guard for this team. You look at the duo of Holloway and Phylon, and I think that you're still going to get a lot of production off of those two players. I think Noah Williams is a really interesting transfer coming from Bucknell, scoring almost 18 points a game in the Patriot League last year, Sean. I think that'll be an interesting guy to keep an eye on. It's obviously a very different style league in the SEC, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to have the same production. I think fourth is pretty generous to have them all the way up there in the preseason poll for the SEC.
And we're going to be releasing our predictions, and I can tell you right now, I've not done them yet, but Alabama will not be as high as fourth. Just think
Yeah.
there's so much firepower in this league, and Alabama brings in freshmen, and you know Houston Millett, who didn't really play a factor last year, but he's made a ton of threes before then. And Mike, if you remember, go back to high school recruiting here, Jaleel Bethea from Miami transfers in, and he was a big time recruit that Jim Larinaga got to go to Coral Gables, and then was kind of lost in the shuffle there as they were sort of irrelevant last year. But he's a player who could be really good too. So, there's a chance that Alabama could just be really good again, a great offensive team, and the 15th best team in the country. But I would have to lean towards them being a little bit lower this time around.
I agree.
All right, Mike, let's go to fifth here in the coaches poll, and that'll be the Arkansas Razorbacks. 15th in Bart Torvik. John Calipari back for year two. Year one was a roller coaster, to say the least. They were good early. They were horrendous in the middle. And they had a pretty amazing, surge at the end of the year to make the NCAA tournament. And then in that tournament, they really pulled off the upset of the entire thing and
Yeah.
beat St. John's to go to the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16, and they were very close to beating Texas Tech to go to the Elite Eight. But a couple returning players here: DJ Wagner, Carter Knox, Trayvon Brazil, Billy Richmond back. They bring in two very highly rated freshmen in Malik Thomas and Darius Acuff. And Mike, I think Arkansas is probably still not all that happy with how last season went once the adrenaline of that late season surge wore off. And
Yeah.
they look to make that look like a fluke and get back to Calipari ball and being in the top 15.
Absolutely. And you looked at, they had a tall task last year.
Yeah,
Calipari didn't have a single player on the roster, at least a scholarship player on the roster when he arrived in Fayetteville, Arkansas to coach the Razorbacks. So they had to piece together something really quickly. And honestly, I think it was impressive that Arkansas was able to field a tournament team
yeah,
in that competitive of a league last year. So I do think they get a little too much grief than they should get. But the leader of this team is DJ Wagner this year. The point guard, I think last night, he struggled a little bit. He only had 8 points against Southern. But their freshman looked phenomenal. Darius Acuff had 22 points. Malik Thomas had 21 off the bench. So this is a really, really good basketball team. And we talked about this in the Big 12 preseason, but the teams that I really like are teams that have some returners, some experience on that team coming back coupled with a couple of good freshmen. And Arkansas really has that. They absolutely have that core group of guys, and then Acuff and Thomas coming in. But my concern is going to be with Calipari teams of recent, can they play defense? They scored 109 points last night against Southern. Offense isn't going to be the problem for them this year, but they gave up 45 points in the second half to Southern University. That's not a good look. And I think that might unfortunately be a tale for what you see further on this year. And it's a concern that I have, which will potentially lead to Arkansas getting knocked out of the tournament early this year.
yeah. I like how the pieces fit. It seems like that they've got a like a real solid rotation. Everyone's going to know their roles now. Last year, I think they were down to 7 scholarship players for a few games there with some
Yeah.
injuries. I think they're a little bit better prepared if they have to go through a stretch like that. Like they have 3 solid bigs, they have 5 solid guards. Like that's a 9 man rotation. That if that has to be cut to 8 or 7, like I think that's okay. But yeah, defense yesterday, Mike. It's cut off for the YouTube viewers here, but if you were to go to their team page on Torvik and scroll a little bit to the right, they gave up 0.95 points per possession to Southern, who was 166, and 0.95 points per possession is like an okay mark against a good offense. You probably, the good, elite Alabama teams over the years, right? Like 1.1, 1.2. So that is, if you play high possession games and you give up 75, like, you know, that it's going to happen. There was 81 possessions in this game, 77 points. Like, I don't think it's unfair to expect a little bit better. Now they scored 1.34 points per possession and didn't turn it over and shot it really well. So, you can get away with that. They have a huge one this weekend, Mike, at the Breslin Center in Michigan, where they'll play Tom
Yeah.
Izzo and the Spartans. They play Duke on a neutral, I believe, on Thanksgiving, if I'm not mistaken. Then they host Louisville, Texas Tech on a neutral, Houston on a neutral, and that's a pretty loaded non-conference. Calipari has never shied away from a good non-conference schedule. He has his returning players, and I think it's fair to expect a lot out of this team.
Yeah, they've also got Houston.
Yeah, yeah. 12 on a neutral. Wonder where that one is. Did they play? They've
They're
maybe.
it's in Newark at the Rock.
Okay, well, that might have
Yeah.
to look into maybe boots on the
Yeah.
ground for that one. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think Arkansas can be really really good. All right, let's
Yeah, I
move
agree.
on to the team that unfortunately was in the very much talked about last night, Mike.
The wrong reasons.
They were talked about as practice started, as Bruce Pearl stepped down, his son Steven takes over, and the sixth team in the coaches poll, 33rd in Bart Torvik now after their very close call yesterday against Bethune Cookman. That's the Auburn Tigers. They have Keyshawn Hall. Pettiford is back. They have Kevin Overton, the transfer from Texas Tech. They get Abdul Bashir, the transfer from Monmouth. Mike, I think before we even saw yesterday's results, we did think there'd be a significant drop off from Auburn, and unfortunately, yesterday proved it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have had them ranked in my preseason top 25 just because of how much turnover that they've had in that program. Obviously, a new coach announced like a month before the season, 10 new players on this roster. So we expected a very significant drop from what many thought was the best team in the country going into the Final Four. With that being said, they looked terrible yesterday. They should have lost that game to Bethune-Cookman. Make no mistake about it, Bethune-Cookman
Yep.
is not a basketball powerhouse. I don't remember last time they were in the tournament, but it wasn't better than a 16 seed. In giving up 90 plus points, they did not look like a tournament team. And it's still early, right? I don't want to overreact to one bad game or a team found a way to win in early November, right? This is a long season, but that was a very concerning result for Auburn yesterday.
Yeah, defensively, 1.13 points per possession given up,
Yeah, to
and
Bethany
they
Cookman.
they were up by three with like 4 seconds left. It fouled a 3-point shooter. I mean, from 10 feet behind the line, Arterio Morris, former Texas player, had some troubles there and wasn't really able to stay on the floor. But you know, he made all three free throws, and then they went to overtime with Bethune Cookman, who entered the game at 197 in Torvik. So they are not as bad as they've been over the years. They've pretty much been in the 300s most times. But and Mike, looking at this non-conference schedule now with what we know, this is a real gauntlet. They have Merrimack and Wofford up next, and then they play Houston on a neutral, Oregon and Michigan at Players Era. There'll be another one there. They host NC State. They play on the road at Arizona. They play Purdue on a neutral. Like this non-conference schedule is loaded, and I think that they've really got to battle to get through here unscathed. Like not even unscathed, but with like a chance to get in that large. They've got to play really good basketball soon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a brutal out of conference.
Yeah.
I think when you look at this, you could argue three of the best teams in the country. I mean, I would certainly say three of the top five teams in the country they're playing one on a neutral, one at home, and one on the road. That game against Arizona, I mean, we're going to learn about this Auburn Tigers team when they go out to Tucson. That's going to be an interesting one. I don't know. Thoughts and prayers, but
Yeah.
um, this is a challenging. Obviously the schedule was made before Bruce Pearl resigned, and maybe that's some of the reason. Maybe there was a disconnect between the athletic director and Bruce Pearl on what they thought the expectations of this team were going into this season. Um, but it had to have been pretty clear. Bruce Pearl would not have been resigning from this, to coach this team if he thought that they were a championship team.
Yep.
Like he's been coaching his whole life to win a national championship. He wouldn't be resigning if he thought this team had a chance to make it to the Final Four,
And
and he did. I think that's pretty telling of this program. And truth be told, I think they're going to have a hard time getting to March with this out of conference. Now,
even if they get through, Mike, at like 8-4, that might be like enough. But that's going to be like they're going to have to play good basketball to be 8-4.
and that's the thing is what they've got. I think I think
I
they get
think
a total of
four
13 games.
four like like real chances to lose.
I mean, four games that they're I think significantly the underdog in,
Yep.
right? And then outside of those games that they're the underdog, NC State, whatever game they also play in Players Era, Oregon, um, yeah, I
That
just
this might eight and
they
four
could lose
or
six
I
games.
guess yeah I think 8-4 might be a like a goal.
Like if they're 8-4 in this schedule, I think they're still a top 25 team.
Yeah, I think
Truth be told,
if you know the wins, the losses don't come to the bye games, and yeah,
yeah,
but I mean Michigan looked great yesterday. Houston, Michigan, Arizona, and Purdue are all probably like top 7 teams, and Oregon has really good returning players. They're going to be as good as they are, and NC State has Will Wade. Like that for NC State to be the easiest one out of these. This is a really yeah. This is a tough non-conference where, of course, if they were to win like a lot of these and be 10-2, then I think we're like, wow, this team's really good. What was he thinking resigning? But even before yesterday, I would have thought that they'll probably drop out of the top 25 and have to, not necessarily pull in Arkansas, but it might be that sort of trajectory, right? We
yeah.
might write them off if they lose a couple of these early SEC games with 3 or 4 losses in the non-con, and then they might have to go on like a pretty impressive run here to get it back. But wow, what a tough test here for Stephen Pearl in year one before he even sees the floor in an SEC
Yeah.
game. But all right, Mike. Well, those were really the big 6 teams that we wanted to go through the schedule, go through the rosters. There is another one of the teams that we didn't mention here. Definitely the biggest disconnect between the computers and the coaches poll, and that will be Vanderbilt, picked 11th in the coaches poll, all the way up at 18th in Torvik. Now, this was boosted after yesterday's humongous win against Lipscomb by a little bit, but there's a clear disconnect here, Mike, between Vanderbilt to the computer nerds and Vanderbilt to the basketball coaches. Not as I've got the non-conference schedule up here. Not a tough, not a really great team on here. They have a couple tough games. SMU at home, Memphis on the road, Wake Forest on the road. But
Yeah, it's
this is a complete 180 from what we just talked about with Auburn. But Vanderbilt, at least somebody thinks that their expectations should be kind of high.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at they lost Jason Edwards last year. That was their leading scorer. That's going to be a tough loss. And that's probably one reason that the computers see, such a significant, difference between them and the coaches. But they have some good returning talent. Tyler Nickel, who averaged 10.5 points a game last year. Devin McLaughlin, who's a 6'7" senior, he averaged 10 points a game last year. Um, and then you've got some intriguing transfers. Frankie Collins is a guy that's coming from TCU, but he only played 9 games last year, so we don't really know what he's all about. And then Duke Miles coming from Oklahoma, also going to be an interesting one, average about 9 points a game. So Yeah, I don't know what the coaches see, but maybe they see something that we don't. They could be
Yeah.
that team though. You know, I think there's going to be one team that's in the back of the pack in the preseason in the SEC that's going to be elevated. You know, somebody's going to come out there. It could be Georgia. I think there's a good chance that it's Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is highly underrated this year right now. You look at some of the guys that they're returning, along with some talent that they're bringing in. I think that's a really good basketball team.
And
Um,
as you were going through there, Mike, I was scrolling through some of the player profiles, and I think there's a couple good players in here. But who's gonna lead this team? Is my question. Like who? I think you got a couple good players in there, but who's the best player? Like, is
I
it
think it's going to
Tyler
be your two senior
Harris?
forwards.
Okay, yeah, Washington and McLaughlin and Nickel.
Nickel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Nickel was
But,
a
you
bench
know,
player at UNC to start his career. Like, I think
yeah,
for Vanderbilt to get like into the tournament like comfortably, you've got to obviously win enough SEC games. Which I looking at this roster like again here, I don't see it like at all. Like I think Mark Byington's a really good coach, but if I had to guess, I don't think this team is even like in the let's throw them on the bubble to begin the year and see what happens. Like there are some dogs in this conference, and I don't know if they have like if they can hang with some of these teams.
yeah. And you look at, you know, some of the stretches that they're going to have in the SEC. Look, I'll be honest. I don't think the SEC is as talented as it was last year. It's a very good conference. Don't get me wrong. Very good conference. It's not going to be the same gauntlet that we saw last year. And I think that it was intentional for Vanderbilt to be able to use this out of conference to kind of see what they've got. Like, who's going to be the star? You know, we've speculated about who's going to be the guy, but we don't really know.
Yeah,
You know, I think that's gonna it's part of the productive scheduling that they had
yeah,
is going to be able to figure out who's the best players on this team. You look at the box score from this opening game, and they had four players in double figures,
yeah.
including Tyler Harris that came off the bench. He also had 15 points, so it was pretty balanced scoring. But Nickel and Tanner were leading the way for the Doors.
It seems like a pretty balanced from the shot perspective too. 12 for Nickel, 10 for Tanner, 7 for Okereke and Miles, 9 for Harris. He had 5 from Collins and James off the bench, 5 from McLaughlin. Like this might just be a like
Yeah,
different person every night team. Like the Calipari.
there's got to be somebody though.
Yeah, there's got
Yeah,
to be somebody
who's
that
who's that guy that takes
yeah
the shot
like
at the end of the game? I don't know.
yeah, we're gonna have to figure that out. They've got a Big 12 road game up next against UCF. Now, they are favored by 6 on the road. They should be able to win that, but their way through here is to win all of their non-conference games and be like 7-11 in the SEC, and then get in as like a 10 seed.
Yeah.
That's what I'm. That's what I'm with one like really good win in the conference. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think that's the only way that they get in. Obviously, very unimpressive, but they're going to have their opportunities in the SEC to pick up some big time wins, and I think they'll get them. But it's just a matter of which ones they can pick off.
All right, Mike. Well, let's go to a team that has a new coach. Now, there are two off the top of my head that have those right now. One of them, let's go to the Longhorn State, where Texas and Sean Miller start year one. Um, you Texas takes Miller from Xavier. I believe Dylan Swain is the only one he brings. They still have Chendall Weaver. They have Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope. They get Simeon Wilcher from St. John's, Cam Heide from Purdue, Matas Vokiatitis from Florida Atlantic. Um, they get started here in just a couple of minutes, or maybe it's already started. But Texas, where do you think Texas falls into all this?
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting offseason hire. They lose to Marquette in the first four, and then they take, or not Marquette, sorry, Xavier, and then they take Musketeers head coach. Um, I don't know if I love this hire by the Longhorns. It was pretty clear that they were hiring him, I think, immediately when they had a coaching search. Sean Miller was the target, but you know, I think kind of similar to Vanderbilt, I think they lack star power we're gonna learn pretty quick. They're playing Duke tonight.
Yep.
I think they just tipped off. So we're gonna be able to see, but Pope and Mark are gonna have to lead this team together. A couple of really strong guards. Um, and they're gonna have a freshman big man that's gonna be coming in to perform pretty well. So we'll see what happens with this team, but I just don't know if they have the depth, and I don't know if they have the star power to compete for an SEC.
They do have a little bit of a softer non-con, of course. After tonight, they have Arizona State on a neutral, Virginia
See,
at home, UConn on the road, and that is it mostly for. They play 5 games against teams in the 300s, so we could see a little bit of computer manipulation from Texas. That's my early thought here. Looking at this, is they're going to be way too high, especially if they keep one of these games against Duke or UConn like really close, win one or a close loss. I think they could be computer merchants early, but I think they have like a good enough team to be like a 7 to a 10 seed, but I don't know if they're I don't know if it's fair to expect more than that.
yeah, I mean we're gonna learn I think a lot about Texas at the Maui Invitational this year. So Arizona State's that first game. Arizona State is the worst team in the Big 12, in my opinion. So we're not going to learn much from them there, but they're going to have 2 more follow-on games, and I think that's going to be really key for understanding how good this Longhorns team is. So when you factor that into the other, things that they've got to play Duke and UConn on the road, yeah, I guess it's not a super, easy out of conference schedule. They do have to go through we'll call it the Northeast Gauntlet, Lafayette, Fairleigh Dickinson, and Rider. Um, they should win all
Yeah,
of those games by more than 25 points. But yeah, I think this team could still compete, but it's crucial that they have some of these easier games on their schedule, and they've got a lot of them to be able to I think shuffle your lineup and figure out what's going to be your winning lineup on the floor this year because
and
we don't know right now.
and a tough start to things for them in the SEC. Home to Mississippi State, and then at Tennessee, at Alabama.
Yeah,
So,
tough start.
and then a couple games later at Kentucky. So tough. I don't know what to expect from this Texas team. I think that they could be a bunch of different things. They could be like a 6 seed and the 20th best team in the country and just kind of good. And then I think they could also be like 18 and 15.
Yeah,
And that won't be enough this time around. Despite it getting them in last year with 7 home losses. But we've already complained about that enough. All right, Mike, let's
yeah.
keep going down the teams here. We got Missouri, we've got Ole Miss high in the coaches poll, not as high in the analytics. Either one of those teams you think can do some damage?
Yeah, I think certainly, you look at Missouri's got some good returning talent. Mark Mitchell's going to lead that team. He had 14 points a game last year. They have also got Anthony Robinson that's coming back. So they've got some talent. And look, I think at the end of the day, it's an easier conference. Missouri, in my opinion, shattered expectations last year.
Yeah.
They looked a lot better. I remember watching them in the bragging rights game against Illinois, and they looked so much better than they were projected at the time, and they only got better. You look at their out of conference, it's pretty easy. The only tough games they
They
really
did
have
they did
is
start the year on the road against a mid major, which is pretty like that's cool.
yeah, on the road at Howard is an interesting one.
Yeah.
You don't really see that too often.
No. And the
Um,
only other game like that this year that I can think of is the game that's happening next Tuesday when Duke is going to West Point to play Army. Really cool for the game. It was fun to watch bits and pieces of it yesterday, but Mike, Missouri's had a weird 3 years, right? Dennis Gates
yeah,
comes in first year, they kill it. 6 seed, I think, 7 seed maybe. They have a great first year. Year 2, they are the worst team in Power 5. I think they go over in the SEC. And then
yeah,
last year, they're back to being a solid team again that's capable of, scoring a bunch of points and beating teams. Like, this is a roller coaster of a tenure here by Dennis Gates, and maybe just a little bit of stability in the middle of the pack might be not the worst thing.
yeah. Like I said, 10-8 in conference play last year was a big win.
Yeah.
So maybe some Missouri fans are just looking for a chill, Let's win a game in the tournament. Let's just have a normal season and not go through like the glass case of emotion again this year. Um, but I think they certainly have the capabilities to do that. And they've got their two rivalry games. They've got Kansas and they've got Illinois in the out of conference. But other than that, it's a cakewalk of a schedule. You look at the other teams like Minnesota and Notre Dame and the only other power conference teams that they play. I don't think they're in a MTE either. Um,
Doesn't look like it.
no, so I think they've got a good shot to do something. They just can't lose any of these, quad three, quad four games early on in the year. That could put them in a big hole going into the SEC play.
And Mike, looking at it right now, they don't. They've won quad three game as of now, and that's the home game against Minnesota. Hopefully, for their sake, Minnesota can get up to 75th, and that could be a quad two. But this is going to be like one of those resumes at the end of the year if they're like 18 and 13, where they're like 6 and 12 in quad one, and like
All right.
13 and 0 in quad two, 3, and 4. Um, yeah, these none of these teams are particularly close to quad three, except for Bethune Cookman, who I think that those computer numbers might be aided by a like if Auburn's like a solid team, that win might stay. If they're able to beat Bethune Cookman, that win might stay in quad three because close games against good teams carry these teams' numbers in the middle of the pack. I've seen it in a
Yep.
ton of mid majors. But yeah, this is going to be like an Iowa State early Otzelberger resume by the looks of it. Let's say they beat Minnesota and Notre Dame, and they lose to Kansas and Illinois. Like this just screams bubble to me.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely. Yeah, I think,
not a lot of wins, a few good ones, no bad losses. Like that's what I see
you know,
here.
if they can beat either KU or Illinois, I think
Yeah,
Illinois is going to end up, I mean, you guys are the Big Ten experts, but I think Illinois is going to end up being a top 10 team. If they can find a way to beat Illinois at a neutral court, that game's going to hold a lot of weight. But
yeah.
there just aren't that many opportunities. If you go 8 and 10 in the SEC this year for them, I don't see how they get in if they don't have, beat Illinois or, maybe Kansas will suffice. We'll
It
see how that team
it
ends up.
it
But
feels like it's got to be like they. I don't know if they need one of the Illinois or Kansas games, but an 8-10 SEC looks a lot
not
better
going to
with a
cut it.
non-conference. Like it
Yeah.
might be enough if your wins can come against some good teams. And I'm trying to think of do they have any of the top of the line teams at home? They play Florida at home. They play Auburn at home. And Tennessee at home, Arkansas at home. Like they have a couple tough. Mississippi State they play twice, and Mississippi they no just once for them. Oklahoma is twice. Mississippi State is twice. Um, so yeah, I mean this is going to be the line for me. I think all the teams above Missouri will be in, all the teams below will be out, and this is the bubblicious team to me. All right, Mike, let's keep it rolling here as we wrap up. Ole Miss, Chris Beard, year three. Um, they bring in a couple players from different places. Most notably, AJ Storr, who was one of the best players in college basketball 2 years ago at Wisconsin. He goes to Kansas, doesn't really materialize. Um, new surroundings for him. Do you think he can get back to that, all conference player that we saw up in Madison?
Absolutely. I just it didn't seem like he was a good fit at Kansas.
Yeah,
Um, you're looking at the establishment that they had with Dickinson and Harris. He just didn't seem to really fit into that offense.
yeah.
And so I think he's definitely very motivated to change his course and try to get drafted in the NBA. We'll see what happens, but I could see him coming to Oxford with a vengeance this year. You look at some of the guys that are returning as well. Malik Dia, that's going to be a big one. Corey Chest, the 6'8" sophomore guard. So this is going to be a team that I think it's one of them that we're going to see potentially overperform and do well. They did some damage and they got into March last year. They he's exceeded Chris Beard has exceeded expectations at Ole Miss, and gone above and beyond what people thought that he would do. I think he's still one of the best top five coaches in college basketball. So I think absolutely he can bring Ole Miss back to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, my bold prediction for the SEC here is that Ole Miss is a good team, comfortably in the tournament, um, and that I think he's the number one name that goes to the biggest job available. I think he,
Yeah,
I
you
think
just
he,
can't bet against Chris Beard.
yeah, I think he needs he, I think he's capable of a little bit more than he showed last year. But at Ole Miss, uh, I don't know if they can win a national title with Chris Beard. Of course, lucky things could happen and they could find themselves in a Final Four. I just think that this is probably like my bold prediction is that Chris Beard will be coaching somewhere else next year, and I think
Yeah,
that's a good thing. I think the Sweet 16, good top 25 team, but um, that their non-conference I've got up here, Mike. Iowa on a neutral, St. John's on the road, NC State on a neutral, and then it also has Alabama A&M and Southern Miss on neutrals. I wonder if that's a mistake, but he hasn't, and Memphis at home early on. He hasn't had the strongest non-conference schedules at Ole Miss, but it seems like as his teams are starting to get better, so is his non-cons.
yeah, certainly adding more teams to the non-con to see if, they can bolster that. They've got, Miami, they've got at St. John's. That's going to be a fun one, let me tell you.
Yeah,
Memphis. So they've gotten better. I remember his first year there, they were undefeated in the non-con, but it meant absolutely nothing because they were playing, the Little Sisters of the Poor every night.
yeah,
So it's different this year, and I think the expectations at Ole Miss, they certainly haven't been like this big since Marshall Henderson. I don't know if they've been bigger in a longer period of time. This is not a program that's built on winning at the biggest stages in college basketball. Um, the one thing I would say is, about, what's the ceiling at Ole Miss? And I don't really know
yeah,
because I don't think we know what any ceilings are anymore in the age of NIL. You know, being secure at Ole Miss isn't necessarily a bad thing. Chris Beard values loyalty. He said that in the past, and Ole Miss has given him a second lease on coaching after he was ostracized at the University of Texas. So we'll see what happens, but I'd love to see Chris Beard coach. I have to hold my tongue because I'm a Scott Drew guy. Um, Sometimes I'm like, man, I wish he could coach at Baylor with Scott Drew, and we had just have two head coaches, but
yeah.
obviously can't do that. But he's an outstanding coach, and I hope that wherever he is, he finds a way to make a run to the Final Four in the national championship.
Yep, it's t- they've got obviously all the SEC schedules are pretty tough, but I think there's a way that Ole Miss can be really good and be. I think protected seed might be a little bit too high of an ask here because I think they are a tier below Auburn and Alabama in
Yeah.
that second tier. I think we've got the four at the top: Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and then tier two we've got Alabama, Auburn, and maybe nobody else. And then tier three is your Ole Misses, your Missouris, Texas, Vanderbilt. Any team honestly can get into that third tier. Um, but yeah, could be an interesting one. We'll do our SEC power rankings, Mike. We unfortunately didn't get to some of these other teams here. Supposed to be at the bottom. Anything you want to add on any of them before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I guess my question to you, Sean, is what do you think is going to be how many teams do you think from the SEC get into March?
I think last year won't happen again.
No.
I think really from a bracketology point of view, like Texas, North Carolina getting in, I don't know if that happens again. Like they got backlash from it. Both teams didn't really play great in the tournament. I know North Carolina won in Dayton, and then they got smoked by Ole Miss, I think. Um, but yeah, I think it's going to be less. I would say 10 or 11 is the most that I could see happening. Unless this conference absolutely kills it in the non-con, then maybe we get to 12. But I would lean towards less than last year. It's going to rely on the top of the conference doing great in the non-con and then losing a couple games in conference.
Yeah, I think right now the number is nine.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of the line, right?
yeah.
I think over nine is a successful year. Under nine, maybe a little bit of a disappointment depending on how many they get in, but I think it's probably nine teams
And
that get into the Big
and
Dance.
part of that, Mike, over the years, even when we go back to the Big 12, and what actually may have hurt them is that you have got to probably have two or three teams at the bottom who are who fall off. And
Yeah.
I think maybe it happened with Oklahoma State that one year where the Big 12 had 10 teams and
Big 12 didn't have that for a few years though. Yeah.
nine of them had like a real shot at making the tournament with like 4 weeks left. I
Yeah.
think that comes with LSU and South Carolina really really struggling, like one or two SEC wins each. I think there's a
Yeah.
chance Oklahoma could be down there. I think Texas A&M year 1 Bucky McMillan could be down there. Mississippi State Christians, they'll find a way to win enough games. They always seem to be in that 8-9 game, regardless of who's wearing those jerseys. But yeah, I don't think it'll be as good of a year as last year for the SEC, but they've got 4, to me, legit national championship contenders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at Florida, they're definitely going to be back up there. I think Arkansas is up there. You might be able to throw Alabama in there, and Kentucky definitely. Those are going to be those teams that they might be looking for some revenge on Florida this year.
All right, well, Mike, why don't we end this with your bold prediction for the conference? Mine is that Chris Beard will do a good enough job to go somewhere else. Last week, both of our Big 12 conference bold predictions revolved around Arizona. So far, so good on that front. Mike, what do you got for the SEC?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what we did last week. I was going to go with Ole Miss going to the Sweet 16, but my other bold prediction for the SEC is that only 7 teams are going to get into the NCAA tournament.
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly bold. It could happen. If there's 6 really good teams and they don't really lose to anybody else other than them, then one more team finds a win to get in there. You know, it's not a great sign for the conference if that happens, I think.
No,
You
no,
know,
it would be a horrible rebound year. And 7 is very pessimistic.
yeah,
Maybe I'll say 8 just to wind that back a little bit. But
yeah.
yeah, I
Seven,
think only 8
seven,
teams are getting in this year.
7 or 8 teams in there.
Yeah,
Yeah, but we'll
yeah.
put a post together when we're done with all these conference previews with the bold predictions and we'll see what people think about that. But that is all we have for you today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.